gather around, and we were running a little late this morning, but I think our time has certainly been well spent. Clarence is speaking at Dudley's Hill this morning, and it's kind of a last minute thing, and he asked me to fill in for him. So I'm not trying to do 1 Corinthians because he's got a study that I'm sure he's following that he's using in that. And I'm just doing some kind of fill-in things. I had a question that was asked me last Sunday. Paul asked me the question, and I really didn't hear him when he asked it during the class, and I asked him after the class. We have one of the vice presidential candidates whose wife is a Hindu, and I'm not sure what he was asking on that, Paul.
Unintended consequences. Take for life, and she doesn't believe as you do, what consequences can it bring out?
Well, I think they're about in all the congressmen and senators. I think there's only about 6 that are members of the Lord's church. So I think we've already answered that question, that you have 6 senators that are Jewish. In fact, Chuck Schumer, who's the leader of the Senate, is Jewish, even though he doesn't seem to act like it sometimes with all the problems that they're having. But and the wives, I don't know what they are. So I don't see that really over the course of our history, we've had people that were basically atheists that have served in our Congress. And maybe some of the things that have happened to our country are the consequences of the mates of some of the people or some of the people themselves. I will have to say this, that Christianity is not demonstrated very much in many of the things that we see in Congress. I've got to work on this thing just a minute, brethren, to turn these hearing aids down a little bit. There you go. I was talking to myself in my ear there. No matter what the people that we put in Washington, no matter who they are or what they do, God is still in control of all of this. And we've got to remember, we're going down a road and there's a fork in the road. No matter whether we take the left one or the right one, God will take that decision and His will be demonstrated whatever we choose to do. That's what we call free will. And so whatever foolish things that those people that we elect and send to Washington do, God is still in control. It's not like, if we elect so-and-so, well, there'll be consequences, maybe economical consequences and maybe other consequences. But God's will, His ultimate will, is still going to be done, and God is in control of all that. Turn back over and read in the book of Daniel, and you'll see that Nebuchadnezzar, who was the most powerful man in the whole world when that book was written, found out that God rules in the armies of heaven, and no man can stay his hand or say to him, "Why did you do that?" He learned it the hard way. It's possible that our country is going to learn it the hard way. Great is a nation whose God is Jehovah. The wicked shall be cast into hell, and all nations who forget God. All nations. And you know, when you read that, I don't think you'll find in parentheses there it says, except the United States. It says all nations. Do you think that the Romans, when they ruled the entire world and they were more powerful than any other nation on the face of this earth, that they ever even considered that their nation would be destroyed and that they would be a place that you think about buying a pizza instead of a world power? God is the one who controls that. And I've got a book on my desk that somebody sent me because I sent them $25 that lists all the senators, representatives, and what their religious belief is. That's the reason I know that there's about, I think, a half a dozen, that most of them are from Texas. There might be one from Alabama that are, and we've got one from Tennessee, John Rose, that are members of the Lord's church. Many of them are Catholic. As I said, there's 6 in the Senate that are Jewish, and all of the varieties of things. Now, I want to let us spend a little time this morning, and a little time is what we have, about parables. Some time ago, we studied about some of the parables and the power of them. But I was thinking this week of what Jesus said if you turn to Matthew 13. Jesus there gives the parable of the sower. And most of the people didn't understand what he was talking about. And in verse 10, he gives the purpose of parables, because from this time on, he's only spoken parables. And he gave his lessons, and they were from parables. And he said in verse 10, the disciples came and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" Because it was obvious the people didn't understand what he was talking about. And the parable of the sower is not a difficult thing to, it's not, he didn't say it in some long 4-syllable words. It's a simple thing. A man goes forth to sow. Some fell on good ground. Some of it fell by the wayside. Some in stony places. And he gives a little explanation of it. And they're standing there scratching their heads, not realizing or knowing what he's talking about. And he said, the disciples came and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" And he answered and said to them, "Because it has been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For whoever has, to him more will be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. Therefore," now here's the reason Jesus said, "I speak in parables." I speak to them in parables because seeing, they do not see, and hearing, they do not hear, nor do they understand. And in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, "Hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and not perceive. For the hearts of this people have grown dull. Their ears are hard of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For surely I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. Now, this morning, we had a different kind of a lesson, basically aimed at those that have small children, even though it could be of benefit to those that were larger. And let me ask you something. We're all adults in here. How many of you knew that we had a problem here with all the small children, especially those of you that come on Sunday nights? How many of you knew that already before you heard that this morning? Just be honest about it. You knew that before you had to hear a sermon on it. Now, I'm still playing this thing. I personally went to one of the elders earlier this week and told them, we're going to have a child or an adult that gets hurt because of what we're allowing right here. And you knew that too, didn't you? Some of you older heads. You knew it. Let me tell you something. Years ago, we had a whole herd of young people here. We were downstairs on a Sunday night having a fellowship, and the kids were running all over the place. They were back in the classrooms, and they were up in this old part here, and there was a set of steps coming, which is still there, right over there under that light right there. There was a set of steps there, and they were jumping down those steps, these older boys were. And I don't know who was the first one to jump, but I think I know who the last one was. And we were sitting in there, and somebody cried out, there's been an accident. And somebody came to a father that was sitting in there and said, your son has been hurt. You need to come and see about it. And he's knocked out. He was laying in the floor. He jumped and misjudged it, hit his head, and it put him right on the concrete floor. And I'll tell you what, you talking about a man and a woman, a mom and a daddy being as white as a gallon of milk, they had to get that boy up. He was unconscious and rushed him to the hospital, to the emergency room, and by that time he had come to, and not knowing whether he had how serious it was. They did x-rays and everything on him and said he's all right. And I'm going to tell you something. I know for a fact that fella, that daddy, was sitting there thinking, why in the world was I allowing my child to be running around in a building like this, acting like a wild animal and getting himself maybe tragically, maybe a brain injury or a broken neck or whatever. And I was that daddy. So I can tell you just exactly how it feels. And when I see these young children jumping off this stage and running with their head turned, and one like to plowed me over Sunday night, coming at top speed, and I just stepped out in there and went by me like a cannonball. And I thought, what are we thinking? What are we thinking? What do we think this place is? If Jerry Maynard could be resurrected from the dead and come back here, He was the principal at the school across the road here for all these many years. And brother, I tell you what, I'll guarantee you, you might do something over there, but you didn't run in the halls, you didn't run like that because he knew what was going to happen. Child is running at top speed and somebody opens the door and they hit a door. Or somebody steps out and they hit them. Or two of them are looking in other directions and they hit each other. You don't run in school. And parents, grandparents, we need to tell our children, you don't run in this building. That's what the multi-purpose room down there is for when it's being used for that. And that's what the playgrounds are for and the ball fields. But this is not the place for that. It's not. It shows a total lack of understanding of where we are and why we're here and why we even have this facility. It is not for that. It is a place to pray, not a place to play. And Steve just did a great job with the lesson this morning. I hope nobody was offended by that. If they are, they need to get offended. If any of us was upset by that, we need to be upset. We need to be thinking we don't need to wait until we're rushing up to the hospital, to the emergency room, because some child has jumped off that stage and hit the wrong way, broken a bone, or some other tragedy. Do you know why anybody ever tried to get in those doors right there that go into the dressing rooms for the baptistry? Anybody? I know some of you have. It's got a child-proof knob on it. It turns. You've got to be strong enough to push in on it to open that door. Do you know why those knobs are on there? Huh? Well, who had drowned in a baptistry? A kid did. Down in Mississippi. Sunday night. Kid always was wanting to look in the baptistry and see in the baptistry. And the Sunday night, everybody's just like it is every place on Sunday night. After services, they're talking and everything. And parents got to looking, and that child was missing. And they looked all over the building. And finally, somebody stepped up on the stage and looked, and there was that child who had all this great curiosity about the baptistry that had gotten in the dressing room, gone up the steps, got down in the water, and drowned right there in the baptistry. I think those child-proof knobs on those doors are worth whatever they cost. You don't have an accident until you have an accident. And you don't get a child hurt until you get a child hurt. And then we all have the recriminations and all of that about, well, we should have done this and we should have done that. And I'm going to tell you something. I know about that because I've been to that school and I've heard that lesson. And I know how easy and how quickly children can get hurt and sometimes seriously hurt. And I'm just so thankful that Stephen, I tell you, he was knocked out. He was unconscious. He'd taken such a bad fall. But thankfully, he took after his daddy and so hard-headed that he was not seriously injured, but he could just as easily be. And then I found out that was a thing among those young boys, was to see who could jump the farthest, jumping down those steps. Tough way to find out something like that. Parables, Jesus said, I'm going to speak in parables because those that want to hear the message, that are open to receive it, will. Those that won't. I'm going to tell you something right now, and you can take it to the bank with you. Our lesson this morning, some of the parents listen to that, and I'm going to tell you, they're going to take it to heart. And then there were others that probably are going to say, I don't think it's that big a deal. And they will not do anything. That's the way the world is. That's the way the world was, and that's the way the world will be on any subject that you can imagine. And Jesus is saying that people that want to do better, want to know God, will listen. Those who don't will not. And so he said, I'm going to continue to speak in parables. And by the way, what is a parable? It's literally where you take something that you know about and you lay it down beside something that you don't know about, but that's similar to it, and make comparisons. It's something to measure something else with. There's all kinds of definitions. Something familiar that you lay down beside something else and you draw comparisons. In the big class, we said it was an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, and that's what it is in very simple terms. Jesus explained it there in Matthew 13. But there's a difference between a parable and sometimes people think, well, they're like fables, like Aesop's fables. No, they're not. Because a parable is either something that is true or it could be true. Now, fables, have talking horses and talking foxes and all that kind of stuff. That's not a parable. A parable is something that I think Jesus sometimes based them on stories or things that were maybe known during his time, but there's not a parable that is something that's just kind of made up that couldn't be true. And so looking at the other things that you see in Scripture that are used, some of these you'll remember. A simile. What is a simile? Something that's, well, let me give you an example. Psalms 1, verses 3 and 4. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. Well, he's not actually a tree, but he's like a tree. He grows and flourishes. The ungodly are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Not literally like that, but they're similar to that. They talk any way their heads turn. A metaphor. It represents something. All flesh is grass, and all the godliness thereof is as the flower of the field. We're told in the Old Testament the Lord is the sun and the shield. Not literally, but he's like that. Then you have the Proverbs. Of course, we have the Proverbs of Solomon and others. Here's one in Proverbs 10 and 19. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. They're wise sayings that those that we read about in the Scripture are inspired, but they're wise sayings. And we've got, in our vocabulary, in our language, we've got all kinds of sayings like that, don't we? What? The still sow gets the slop. You not heard that before? You've never heard that before? And you're from Jackson County? The still sound. Go out in the pig pen and you watch when hogs are being fed. You take the slop bucket out there and you pour it out in the trough, and they're biting each other on the leg and they're doing everything. But the old sow that's got all the wisdom, it's been to that trough more times than any other hog, while they're fighting and scratching and biting and all that, will walk over there and fill his or her stomach. The still, the quiet sow that's the one that gets fed. Don't drive your ducks to a dry pond. You hadn't heard that either? He's as independent as a hog on ice. Nobody's ever heard that before? Yeah, you've heard that. You've heard. Our language is full of all that. And in Jesus' day, I'm sure some of these things were sayings that were incorporated into their speech. And there's the fable. That's what we were mentioning about Aesop. And he's the most famous of all those that wrote fables. But here's what parables do that these other things don't do. And you may not have thought about a parable in this respect, because as we're reading through them in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as you read these, like the parable of the Good Samaritan, after you read that or you hear it, it leaves all kinds of things that you've got questions about. After you read about, here's the Samaritan who normally would have not done anything for the Jews because the Samaritans and the Jews hated each other. And about this Samaritan, why he did what he did, why the priest and the Levite of all people. I fell down beside the road out here about a month or so ago, laying there in the ditch. How do you think I'd have felt if Charlie Vaughn had walked by me and said, "Boy, I hope you don't get that wet dew on your pants there," and just left me laying in the ditch? Or Steve came by and he saw where it was and he walked around me, and you think that I wouldn't have noticed something like that? Charlie, I noticed that. When you're in need, I think sometimes you remember those folks who should have helped you that didn't, more than actually you remember the one that did. Maybe it doesn't work like that. But a parable, look at the parables of Jesus. And the depth, they're brief. Most of them are very brief. But the depth of the meaning that is in there, look at the Good Samaritan. Look in Luke 15, where Jesus tells in 3 different ways how people become lost. It's lost, the lost sheep. Sheep are lost why? They wander away. Do we have brethren that wander away? Yeah, we've got a bunch of them. And then he said there's the lost coin. How are coins lost different than sheep? Coins are lost because they're lost at the hands of other people, aren't they? I've got maybe a quarter in my pocket here. That quarter will stay there. If it's lost or misplaced, it will be at my hands because I mishandle it. And Jesus, I think, is representing here that in his day, there were so many people that were lost because of the teaching of the so-called religious people of his day, the Jewish, that their leaders, their teachers, their influential people who did not accept Jesus because he was not who and what they were looking for. And so they rejected him. And they had such great influence on the people that Jesus was trying to teach. So there's some wander away like sheep. How many people today are going to be lost because they have listened to false teachers? And I'm going to tell you something. There are some powerful false teachers in this world that have great power and authority that misguide, mislead, misteach other people. So you had people that were wander away, people that were lost at the hands of others. Both of those things are still absolutely taking place today. And then he said there's a third, the lost son. What was different about him? Well, he didn't accidentally wander away. You know, that's what sheep do. They will accidentally, they don't mean to be lost, but they're looking for grass and they're looking for water and they got their head down and they'll just follow grass as far as it goes. If it's over the side of a cliff, they'll still be chewing on it when they hit the bottom. They wander away. People are lost by being mistaught. But that example, as Jesus said, there are some people who just rebel against God and they get up and they leave. 3 different ways. And that's all in that parable there. And so all these stories, here's some an explanation. They withdraw the light from those who love darkness. They protect the truth from mockers and scoffers. They withdraw the light from those who love darkness. That's what Jesus basically said in Matthew 13. Those who hear but don't hear. They see, but they don't see. Why? Because if they acted on what they heard and what they saw, they would have to change their life. And they don't want to do that. Here's why parables are remembered. Because they arouse thought. Do you know that any lesson or any sermon that doesn't have illustrations in it may be a good lesson, but it probably won't be remembered? Anybody here that can remember a sermon they heard 18 years ago that had an illustration in it that they can remember what the illustration was? Anybody? No, huh? Anytime.
I listened to an illustration, it's probably been 35 years ago, when J.T. West was talking about a little snake, I guess, tried to talk to the Indian boy and taking him across on his back across the river or whatever, or in his vest, and so he finally agrees to it, gets him out, takes him all the way across the river, swims the river, gets the other side of the snake bites. He says, "Why did the white man try, it's some kind of deal on some rings?" Well, you knew the creature I was when you.
You knew I was a snake when you took me. That's an old one. That's been around. Actually, that's from a parable, but it's been turned into an illustration. It's been used over and over and over again. I'll tell you, stories, our mind grasps those. And that's why illustrations are so powerful. They arouse our memories, and they make us think about things. And then when we're thinking back, they arouse our memory. They stir up people. They attract people. They hold our attention and our interest. And they create pictures in our mind. You know, we learn by illustration and exaggeration and repetition. Those three things. If you're going to teach, if you'll use those three things, whoever you're teaching is going to remember it much, much better than if you're just giving pure facts out there. Repetition is the way that God said that he wanted his people taught. Book of Deuteronomy, when they get up in the morning, when they on their way to school, when they're on their way back home, put it on the doorpost over their houses. You teach them and teach them and teach them, and you tell it to them over and over and over again. Repetition, 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 so that it becomes a part of them. It's like the multiplication tables. You know, how many thousand times did we go over those to learn that 7 times 7 is actually 49? And when did you learn that? Way, way, way back there in school. You know, I can still quote poems and things that I memorized when I was a freshman and sophomore in high school, when they had us to do that, because I went over it so many times. And it was like the multiplication tables and things like that. Repetition, repetition, but illustration. Then if you illustrate something and you exaggerate it so that it makes a picture in a person's mind, repetition, illustration, exaggeration, yes.
Sometimes we call that also making a connection to what the lesson's all about.
It,
Here, those different kinds of pathways that we've connected to, and now we've embraced.
if you've got a story that connects with a thought that you're trying to get people to understand, and you have a story, or you do it in such a way that it stimulates their minds and it makes us think about it a little bit, then our memory latches onto that. I love illustrations in lessons and in sermons. I have going back a long, long time. I can remember illustrations that I heard 50 years ago. In fact, I probably can, because I've used them so many times myself. And somebody said, "Where'd you get that?" Well, I just thought that up myself. No, I can't even remember the first time I heard some of the things, because they go back so far, but they latch on. And parables are like that. They create pictures in our minds. I mean, when you think about the prodigal son, and you look at the text there, and he goes to his father and he demands from him, "Give me what's coming to me. I want my inheritance." I mean, it really causes you to picture something that, if you're reading in the book of Romans is all about concepts and theology, and it's hard to remember things like that because they're abstract to our mind. But these things that create pictures and images, Luke 16, the rich man and Lazarus, you know, probably most of us sitting right here could kind of go step by step of what's in that parable right there of Jesus. Some people say that it's not a parable, but it's included. And so parables were the primary way that Jesus taught people. And I think he used them because they taught people. They could remember what he was telling about. And here's a quote from someone, I don't know who, that parables preserve the truth because they conceal the truth from hard hearts, and they're disinterested, and they're convinced truth seekers and condemn those who are not. Why? Jesus said this in Matthew 13. Why would he want to conceal the truth from hard hearts and disinterested people? He said, you have ears, but you don't hear. Why would that be a purpose of using parables? We've only got just a minute, but it's a good thing to contemplate. Why does God operate like that? Doesn't he desire that all men be saved? Yes. Then why doesn't he overpower us with these things so that we just have to hear it and we have to believe it and we have to do it?
We rebel.
Charlie?
It's so simple. I mean, when he spells it out so simple, you've got to not want to understand it. I mean, you've got to totally ignore it. I mean, it's laid out so simple that anybody can understand it. So it's almost intentional. If you see it or don't see it, you don't want to see it. You know? It's like a stop sign that you run. You know, it was there. You saw it with your eyes, but you didn't pay attention.
You know, if you've ever been in a Bible study with someone that, and you either read the scriptures or let them read the scriptures that tell them what they need to do, and they just shake their heads and say, well, I just don't see it like that. Well, how in the world do you see it? Explain it to me. You know, if you don't see it that he's saying, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, tell me what that means. How do you see that? What does that mean? I mean, not in that tone of voice, but that's how frustrated mentally you get when somebody says, well, I just don't see it like that. I don't think it means that. Well, what does it mean?
On Judgment Day, though, we have no excuse. When it's laid out that plain, we have no excuse.
Hearing, you don't hear. And seeing, you don't see it that way. I don't understand it that way. I don't think it means that. Well, then what in the world does it mean? Do you know that God has really made what a person, the instructions about what we need to do to be a Christian, so simple that you've got to really work at it, not to understand it just at one reading of it. But Jesus said that these things, there are men who do not love the truth, that have pleasure in unrighteousness, that like the pearls before swine, that rend it under their feet because it has no value to them. And boy, isn't that a great picture, that when we just ignore the Word of God, that we're like hogs that, is there anything in the world that's nastier or dirtier than a hog or smells any worse? I mean, you can smell a hog barn a long way before you get to it. Well, might be a close second. But when you take precious, valuable jewels, pearls, and pitch them out there in the mud, what's the pig going to do to it? he's going to step on top of it. He'll try to eat it. When he sees he can't eat it, he'll just plow it under in the mud. The hog loves the mud. Jesus said there are many people who love the mud. They love the darkness because their deeds are evil. And so he taught in such a way that those that wanted to hear and understand did hear and understand, and those who didn't simply made fun of the parables that he told. I hope that this has been worth something to you. Maybe you at least found out what being as independent as a hog on ice is about. And I wish I had some of my daddy's kin folks to come and talk to you. They could fill the rest of the day, and that's the way all my daddy's family talked, in expressions like that. I was thinking, I had a second cousin that had the world's record for how many cars that he could steal before he was caught, and he was at 15. And they had it's on the front page. How is it when your folks that are kin to you do something, it winds up on the front page of the Nashville Tennessean? And in this, it was explaining why he'd stolen all these cars, that probably he hadn't been treated right when he was growing up, didn't have enough to eat, and, you know, that was whoever the reporter was that wrote it. And so not long after that, one of my other cousins came by, and I was visiting with him, and I said, have you heard about this boy? And he said, yeah, Hoss. He said, I know who they're talking about. And I said, well, what about this? It said in the paper that he probably didn't have enough to eat when he was growing up. And here's how he answered me. He said, well, I reckon he was there every time there was any food in the trough. And I thought, well, that gives me a good picture right there. That was the way he answered me. That's been 65 years ago, and I still remember that. You see, that's what word pictures do for us. He was there every time there was any food in the trough, just like the hogs. That's my kin, folks. You probably got better ones than that. Now, you don't have. They're great people, great people. Have a great day. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll be dismissed. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the wonderful service that we've had today, the instruction that we all need to remember where we are and why we're here, and help us to be examples to all these young children that are so full of love and grace and hope. Help us to be pictures in front of them. Give us a good day and bless us in the ways that we need to be blessed. In Jesus' name, amen.